Okay, here we are for the end of November live stream. As always, please in the live chat tell me if you can hear me well. And of course, also in the Moore's Law's Dead Discord, tell me if you guys can hear me well as a check on the authority of the live chat people. All right, you can hear me. You can hear me. All right, all checks are good to go. And yeah, again, welcome to the end of November live stream. For those who haven't listened to one of these before, I prepare notes, an analysis, or a leak in the beginning, something that I had to get through this week that couldn't wait to be its own video, just had to become part of the live stream. And then I just start working through live chat questions and questions that were pre-prepared for patrons. Again, if you join the Patreon at the proper tier, you can submit questions ahead of time. There's I think every time I can remember, a lot of those questions from patrons, I will read it while preparing the notes for the show, and then I will go to a source and do more research. So if you want to be able to submit questions for free and ahead of time with more research, join the Moore's Laws at Patreon. But also, of course, if you just want to contribute to the channel by giving a tipped question here, then yeah, do it. I will, of course, try to answer any questions I notice that I think are interesting, but of course, the ones that tip will be more noticeable. And so let us now put this down here. And again, don't wait. Put in the tipped questions now. I'll start logging them. Mods will pay attention to them, and then I'll work through them. But we really do need to start with the analysis of Battlemage today because this was going to be its own video, but ultimately I'm just tired from this year, if I'm being entirely honest, actually. And I thought that this could just be part of the start of a great discussion with you all today. So let me put the lights to Intel, and then I'm going to do that little fun thing I do where I do this, and let's hope it works. Boom. All right. And then let me zoom in here, make sure it's centered a little better. Da-da, da-da, and then zoom in slightly more. And then we'll update that. Okay. So let's get into it. And the first thing I want to open up with when talking about Battlemage is these leaks that I put out a year ago. And, you'll be able to find these. Look this up on the Moore's Law Said YouTube channel. It is hilarious, but I have to cover them because this one and this one here covered everything. I got the die size correct, the memory configuration, the fact that it won't be coming to laptop, and also that it's unlikely they'll be able to launch a mid-range or high-end card this year, which is true. We now know that the B580 is and B570 are what's coming out, and they are both low-end cards. And I have to bring this up because every now and then you got to go back and look at what the reception was to, videos like this and this that people said were too negative. I mean, I'm sorry, guys. It's true. It's correct. Intel, and I think this is an important thing to cover first before I get into the B580. Intel said ultra enthusiast and this weird vague 2023 to 2024. It does not matter what happens with Battlemage, people. Let's call spade a spade on this one. Intel said they would have ultra enthusiast graphics cards launching late 23 through 24. That has not happened. That is not going to happen. The B580 is struggling to firmly beat a 3060, which is an 8 nanometer card from 3 years ago, almost 4 years ago, actually. And so I think the first thing I would say is there are grounds for a lawsuit against Intel on this alone. Intel's rushing out the B580 from what I hear with basically no volume because they have to pretend to investors that they met their roadmap. But if you actually look at their roadmap, they were saying ultra enthusiasts launching through 23 through 24. 24 is almost over. There is no enthusiast. So let's just call it those videos that I put out correct. All right. No matter what these people here said. And I want to cover this too because I don't know where some people are getting their information. I think maybe there's just a ton of copium here, but you'll see people say stuff like ARC is selling well right here, right? And then they miss that they have no market share. So again, we have to set the stage by getting the facts straight because this isn't a channel that lies. This isn't a channel that lets emotion cloud our judgment and pretend the world is the way we want it to be, not the way it is. This type of stuff, I really think with Pat being fired and the implosion of Intel's earnings, record lows, the cope's got to stop, people, because I am still to this day seeing so much copium being huffed by people. I don't know what to do. And I guess that's kind of what I'm here to dispel today. Because again, reporting the facts, not what we wish was true that isn't true. So let's get into this here. Now, when we actually talk about arc and price performance, much like with the Alchemist launch, it's very distorted. And I just think these need to be in the back of your head here. All right. Right now, you can get an RTX, oops, wrong mouse. You can get an RTX 3060. It still has 12 gigabytes of RAM, just like the B580, for $260 right now. You can get a 7600 XT for $310. That is a 16 gigabyte card. Or again, the fan favorite, the thing I keep recommending for budget builders, you can get a 6800 16 gigabyte for $360. Now, using hardware unboxed data, if we tabulate all of this and adjust for the fact that Intel is claiming that the B580 is 10% faster than the 4060, although we'll get to it in a second, I don't think it will turn out 10% faster. But even if we humor Intel here and adjust for MSRP, and this is where I'm actually going to look for you guys to comment after I'm going to get to a question. I'm going to want to see what your responses in the live chat. But look, if you compare, again, assuming Intel's numbers aren't cherry picked at all, which when has that ever been true? But if you compare the B580 to the 7600 XT, it's like 25% better price performance according to Intel's own numbers. Let's compare it to the 3060, which almost costs the same as the B580. You can get it right now, single fan cooler, probably more efficient actually in a lot of use cases with this version here. 22%, or I'm sorry, 22% worse price performance. AMD 25%, Nvidia 3060 22%, and then if we go to the 6800 16 gigabyte, only 4% worse price performance. I mean, honest to God, people, like I've seen people go, oh, it looks like Battlemage is a good deal. You know, I guess maybe I would recommend it for the low end. We are talking about 20%, like 4 to 25% difference in price performance. We're not talking about double the price performance. And I have to ask all of you here, how many of you, your friend who doesn't watch all this stuff, isn't looking at every gamer's Nexus benchmark or something, and they say, I have I have like a $300 or less budget, maybe $400 or less, but I'm really looking to save some money. What would you recommend? Are you really going to tell them that they should save like $20, $50 and have marginally better price performance in the off chance that Battlemage won't have issues? I don't think I could believe anyone here who would say that. And so that is why we need to start with what I am showing you here right now, because this narrative that it's really good value, it really isn't that much better. The 6800 is about the same value. These cards are a little worse, but you wouldn't spend the extra $50 maybe, or even just $10 for the 3060 to make sure it works and is going to get driver support for a decade like Nvidia will give you. I don't believe you. I don't believe anyone would do that. And by the way, this is just the common stuff. Like this is just the things that you'd probably look to buy instead of Battlemage first. A 3060, a 7600 XT, 6800, names we are all used to on Amazon, Micro Center, Newegg. I'm not talking about scraping the bottom of the barrel here. But if you really look hard, you can find things like a 6750 XT for $300. That's just flat out better price performance than Battlemage. I'm sorry. Like that's going to be 20, 30% stronger for 20% more money. Battlemage today can't even claim better price performance than something you can get new. I'm not on eBay. Stuff you can get new right now. A $250 6710 gigabytes. That's $20 more than what the B570 will be. Same performance, probably, maybe even better. Same amount of RAM. You're not going to spend $20. We're not going to dusty mining cards on eBay here. You can go to some websites and find them new for even less, the 3060 12 gigabytes. So I'm sorry, like we've got to start the Battlemage analysis by reminding everybody that let me put the camera back on me. We need to remind everybody that the 3060 isn't like it was in 2021. It's not $400. It's not $300. You can often find them for $250. The 6800 isn't a $600 card anymore. It's a $350 card oftentimes. And you need to think about that when you consider Battlemage's value. All right. Now let us go back to the slides then. All right. All right. And this is where it gets pretty bad. So I've already compared it to the 3060. Remember, Battlemage has a die size. Let me move this here. That is 272 millimeters squared of supposedly TSMC 5 nanometer silicon. I'll get to that in a second, why I say supposedly. 272 millimeter squared, 276 for the 8 nanometer 3060. Guys, I remember, and I think Gamers Nexus also reported on this years ago, that AIBs were telling Gamers Nexus, they told me as well. Well, they told me more about the 3070, but specific to the 3060, they told Gamers Nexus that a 3066 gigabyte was breaking even, I believe, at like 250 or 280. 8 nanometer, an 8 nanometer 3066 gigabyte was breaking even 250, 280 3 years ago. How in the hell is a 5 nanometer Battlemage with 12 gigabytes making a profit? It isn't. It isn't. The 12 gigabyte B580 on 5 nanometer, it isn't making a profit. I don't know how much money Intel's losing on these. It honestly wouldn't surprise me if they're losing 30, 40, $50. There's a reason, there's a reason I believe that they canceled the laptop launch. It's because they cannot, first of all, OEMs don't want it in their laptops, number one. But number two would be that Intel knows that they need to make the minimum amount of these cards as possible as a smokescreen to investors, because were they to sell 10 million of these, they'll go bankrupt because they're not making any money on these. Nvidia with 8 nanometer and 6 gigabytes couldn't make a profit easily with the 3060 at 250. How in the hell is a 5 nanometer 12 gigabyte card making a profit? And this is where people would jump in though and go, some people would jump in and say to me, oh, but you know what? That's good. That's pro-consumer. Who cares if they're not making a profit? And to a certain degree, I agree. I doubt AMD is making a profit getting rid of those 6800s for 350, or if they are, it's almost nothing, whatever. But the point is that AMD will have a more profitable RDNA 4 coming out. Those profits will propel them to be able to make more cards after that. There's a middle ground between like Nvidia being critical of them being greedy and saying you should lose money, because once you get to the lose money argument, it's unsustainable. Like Nvidia makes more money every generation, which allows them to fund better architectures every generation. Intel's probably losing $20 to $40 per card sold right now. That's why ARC is effectively canceled. They can't afford to keep doing this. And so that's something that needs to be covered when it comes to the die size. But let's continue back to the analysis, everybody here. So move on to the next slide. Went through that. Oh, yeah. And this is where it gets even more damning. So if you thought it was bad that Intel can't really beat a 8 nanometer card with a similar die size to their 5 nanometer product firmly, and look, they might beat it by 20%. I don't know, but that's not like crazy different. 8 nanometer versus 5 nanometer. This should be a blowout. Don't forget what the die size is of the 4070 Ti. I didn't say 4070. I said 4070 Ti is only got a die size. I don't even think it's about 10% bigger. We're in the same ballpark of die sizes here with the 4070 Ti. And ladies and gentlemen, Intel is using that much silicon, 4070 Ti levels of silicon, to compete with the 8 nanometer 3060. So again, I just, anyone who says this looks more impressive, this is brute force. This should be several tiers stronger than it is. And I guess really what my point is isn't just to dunk on Intel right now. My overall point is there's this narrative coming out I've seen from some websites that like Battlemage looks better than Alchemist. No, it doesn't. The A770 was competing with the 3060 with a better node and more silicon. It really should have been competing with the 3070 Ti, at least. The 3070 Ti, the same die size as the A770, and yet it was on 8 nanometer, not 7, even 6 nanometer versus 8 nanometer. So now we're talking about similar die size to what? The 4070 Ti this time instead of the 3070 Ti. And what's happening with that similar die size? Losing hopelessly. I do not see any evolution in competition between Alchemist and Battlemage. The only thing that will probably be better is driver support. We have to hope. Again, it's Intel, so who knows what's going to happen. But I'm not seeing them catch up. This looks like a card that should have competed with the 3070 Ti back in the day, ended up competing with the 3060. Now a card that should be competing with the 4070 Ti is competing still with the 3060 somehow. So from what I'm seeing here, they're going backwards actually in their capabilities. But anyways, let us get back to the analysis here. Is no wonder why Pat was fired with this launch here. All right, so let's get into the numbers here. So the B580, they're saying 24% faster than the A750. We'll have to wait for third-party benchmarks as always. I don't really have much to say about this, except that I think it's odd it's compared to the A750. Why the A750? Like, there's some real 3D chess going on here. Why not compare the A580 to the B580 to the A580? Isn't that what it's replacing? No, it's not? Okay. Well, then why aren't you comparing it to the A770? That was the best card from that generation. Oh, you're not. I mean, again, this just screams to me bending over backwards to find some way to make this look good. It really should be compared to either the A770, which is the strongest card from the previous gen, but I think they're not doing that because they know the performance is going to be dangerously close. And then they're not comparing it to the A580 because, well, I don't know. I don't actually know why they're not. That's what you should compare it to. And here's a big red flag again. All right, so here we go. Let's just continue this. They show this chart here, which immediately, whenever you see crazy double-digit stuff, like something like Meteor Lake being 50% more efficient than Hawkpoint or Phoenix, that your alarm bells should go off. 50% better? Does that ever really happen anymore with Intel? When you see 64% more performance, they want you to look at this big number here, and they don't want you to notice what's going on, where two things are going on here. Number one, they had to crank up ultra ray tracing and go over the 8 gigabyte buffer, or really force the 4060 to try to cram more information than it can in 8 gigabytes. But even then, when you look at the frame rate here, 51 frames a second, so we're not even getting an average of 60. It's probably getting frame drops to 40, so this isn't a realistic setting you would use. But even more damning, when you actually can fit in the buffer of the 4060, the 4060 wins in this comparison. That's telling me, right, that potentially when we look at this average, like I guess that's 8 gigabyte to, yeah, so that's 8 gigabyte to 12 gigabyte. Are they, oh my god, that's it, right? That I'm gonna write down a timestamp for this. Um, I think I can tell you why they're not comparing it to the A770. Do you know why, ladies and gentlemen? It's probably because the A770 has enough VRAM. And if they don't have that advantage, 12 versus 8, whether it's 12 versus an 8 gigabyte 4060 or 12 versus an 8 gigabyte A750, I bet the advantage really isn't there. Like, they're hiding this. It's in their own numbers, Intel's own numbers. They need to have a card running out of RAM, because if it's not running out of RAM, this is what happens. And Battlemage, or some of my sources that were calling it for a year, Bowelmage, is not looking good. So, and then, even the efficiency, like if you compare the B580 to the A580, I don't know why it looks so insane in this camera view. Sorry. It's still using more energy. If you account for it using like whatever that is, like 8% or 10%, whatever. I don't know what I'm not adding up, like 10% more energy, and then account for the fact that it's really only like 35% faster. I mean, they're going from 6 to 5 nanometer and only getting really 20 to 30% more efficiency. So even the efficiency, not really seeing it. And then this is where we can finally get to a leak that I have for you all today. I've of course been asking a bunch of retailers and distributors what's going on with Battlemage. And yeah, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. A lot of people, and this is, I'm not going to say who, don't want to give away a source. This is a major, major, major a retailer. Okay. You know of it. Half of the people, most of the people here probably bought from them. They don't know when they're getting Battlemage still. We're a week out, people. So I guess we'll see if something gets shoved through. But I think right now I'm gonna have to stick with what I've been saying about the Battlemage launch for about a month now or more, and that's that it's rushed out. It's to appease investors. I don't really think there's gonna be real availability. It will still probably be easy to get in some regions simply because no one wants it. But yeah, that's what's going on with it. There are people that don't know when they're going to get Battlemage for sale, and yet it's supposed to launch in a week. I'm not even talking about like they don't know how many. It's like one AIB like ASRock hasn't told them yet. I'm saying they don't know. They don't have a shipment, a receival date a week out. If you were to buy something online and it's supposed to arrive in a week and it hasn't shipped yet and they don't know when it will and no one can tell you, will that make you confident it's going to be there when you want it to be there? So I don't know. That's my A580 analysis for the most part. We're going to get into some questions now. I didn't make it its own video because I didn't think it. I think it should be part of a larger conversation. I think it's already been depressing enough for it to be its own lone piece of content. So I guess we'll leave it at that. And I'll cross all of this out here after that leak. And then I want to talk about Pat Gelsinger. I've got 2 pages of questions about Pat Gelsinger. So we'll get to that. But before I do, of course, I need to say a word from the sponsor of this video, which is Micro Center. Micro Center is the sponsor of this live stream yet again. Right now, Micro Center has a Black Friday and Cyber Monday sale still going on through this week. So if you're interested in building a new desktop right now, I don't think there's really a better place you can go than Micro Center. In fact, as I always do, just to like gut check myself, because the prices are always lower every time I check for the most part. Let me see what is there any deals on this CPU? I wonder. Let's see. Yeah, there's the 7600X 3D for $299 right now, and they'll give you 32 gigabytes of DDR5 6000. Not budget. Well, I guess at this point it's still not the most expensive RAM, but it's decent RAM and 32 gigabytes of it with a really good gaming CPU. And then I think you can get another $50 off a motherboard if you buy it with it. I know that they have the 6800 16 gigabyte for 360 there right now. That thing's almost sold out. Again, they still have the bottom prices on that. So yeah, I mean, please check out those links in the description. I genuinely think now is the time to build a new desktop if you think you're going to need one in the next year or so. Who knows what's going to happen with tariffs, possible inflation next year. Go now. If you need a new desktop, build right now. And again, links in the description too. Their new CPU bundles. I only mentioned one of them, the 7600X 3D. They have a ton of other crazy ones as well. They have the early, you can sign up for early access to their news. And then also they're opening a new Micro Center in Santa Clara, California. And you can get, of course, a free USB drive if you sign up to go to the early launch of that. So again, thanks to Micro Center for sponsoring this video. And please support the channel by supporting a sponsor that supports me. All right, now let us move on to, of course, more Intel questions. I could not believe how many that I received here. Actually, let me just jump into a couple of these tipped questions first so we don't miss them. So Mookie EX writes in and says, in a world where jumped away from me. YouTube tries to hide stuff from me. Oh my God, did it steal it from me? Well, if anyone has that Mookie AX question in the Moore's Law's Dead Discord, punch it again. But I believe the question from Mookie, thank you from the tip, was in a world where like you need $2,000 graphics cards for ray tracing and PCs are $4,000. Like who's really going to do that and stuff? I believe that's what the question was when I just glanced at it. And when it comes to just how expensive it is for ray tracing right now, what's required, still not every game supports it. Although we're seeing games, there's a decent amount of games now coming out that require ray tracing. So I don't think you can really say ray tracing is niche anymore. That's my opinion. But how can it ever take off? And the answer is possibly RDNA 4 people. Like, if AMD brings, as I've leaked months ago, 4080 performance, including around their ray tracing, to $500 to $600, ray tracing is going to take off as a feature in most games, I think. And I think that's going to start the inflection point of indies really leveraging it more. Because right now, the problem with ray tracing is that it's still just this bolted on feature. It doesn't just work as Jensen Wang likes to pretend. It's another thing a dev has to do for more eye candy. And once you get to a point, though, where you can get $500 cards that can ray trace pretty well, which means $400 cards that can probably ray trace like a 3080 or something, and so on and so forth down the stack, that allows indie devs to finally just do the it just works thing and use ray tracing to make AAA graphics that aren't the most efficient, but they can do them now. They can afford to do them on a smaller team. So, the worry about the cost of ray tracing and stuff, that's why we don't need a $2,500 card 50-60% stronger than a 4090. What we need is a card 80% as good as a 4090 for $500, so everyone uses this. And then once you get that, I guess the consoles are still going to hold back ray tracing to a certain degree, because even if the PS5 Pro might be on that like kind of 4070 tier, if perfectly optimized, it's still like most people don't have a PS5 Pro. So, but I think what you'd see is the paving and the groundwork laid for actually not to be that hard to support. Let me move on to another question here. Okay. As an indie VFX editor, Arc is very attractive. It's slim for gamers, but all VFX guys need is VRAM and bandwidth. We render all night, any day. They even put out Blender support, which works better than AMD's. I mean, sure, if you have an app that works perfectly, buy the best card for it. I just, again, think we have a problem here where, like, maybe I'll flip back over. Let me do that. I just think that we have a problem here, people, where everyone is comparing stuff and saying Arc looks good and forgetting we are talking about 8 nanometer cards from 2021. We're talking about 200 millimeter squared, so a smaller die size, 30% smaller die size than the B580 cards here on a worse node. 30% smaller, a third smaller die size and a worse node, competing in performance. Cut down cards from 4 years ago right here on bargain bins. If this is what it's competing with, it's not really competing with the 6800. I shouldn't even say it's competing with it. It's getting destroyed by that. But it's really not even, I mean, the 4060 people is a 128-bit, like 150, I think, millimeter square die. I mean, we're talking about what would usually be relegated to $150, $200 markets, and it's years old. Like, that's, people, please, like, if it's good for your VFX stuff, good for you. Buy whatever is best for the money for you. But you have to remember that the B580 is launching in a week, and RDNA 4 and Blackwell are launching in a month. They're not even a full week apart, really, and that's what the competition's going to be. And I suspect RDNA 4 is going to be pretty good, and I'm sure Blackwell is going to be incredibly good at the things you are talking about. And we shouldn't be that impressed that an 8 nanometer card from 4 years ago is beat by like 20%. I mean, I'd hope so. Let me continue to scroll through the questions here. Okay. Mexi Man and Cheese writes, and it says, any Z2 Extreme handheld leaks. Bonus if you know if they have a second Thunderbolt for 4 or 5 or Oculink. Well, I'm sure that some of them will have Oculink, but do I need to say anything about the Z2 Extreme? Hasn't that leaked? I mean, I guess I haven't asked any of my sources about it, so it's not like I'm not independently confirming any of the leaks that have come out, but hasn't it pretty much been confirmed that the Z2 Extreme is like Strix's point with all of the compute units, but only Zen 5C enabled or something? To let me know in the Discord or something if I'm remembering that correctly. I think that's what the Z2 Extreme is going to be. It's going to be based on Strix again, from what I'm seeing here. And they're oddly making the Z2 and the others come from other APUs, but I'm sure that's just because of how in demand Strix is, that they're saying the Z2 Extreme is like, I'm sure there's some yields of Strix where they have the compute units working fine, but then they've got a lot of defective Zen 5 cores. So they just disable those and enable, the other ones. And that's what they're saving those yields for, is the Z2 Extreme. But yeah, that's what it's going to be, I believe. Although, again, I guess maybe I should ask people to double check that. Bluedy says a $200 GPU will beat a $4,000 CPU in ray tracing. Why do they still use Cinebench to open? Thank you. So Bluedy actually corrected what Muty was asking me about ray tracing. Thank you for doing him that, or her, that solid. Why do they still use Cinebench to open up CPU benchmarks? I don't really know, because that's what people expect. And if that's what people expect, that's what people expect. Are you not going to show Cinebench? So I agree, though. Like, no one really uses CPU. I shouldn't say no one. I'm sure someone's going to type right now they do. But for the most part, you're using, let's be honest, A5000s, A6000s, or I guess they're just called RTX 6000s now, to render. They're not using a $4,000 CPU to render. Most of the time they're using the GPU, unless there's a specific thing they need to do to be extra precise. So I don't know. I don't have an answer for you why Cinebench is quoted so much. I think that it's vastly over quoted, and it just kind of flies back and forth when it's useful. Like, Intel likes to talk about Cinebench until Zen 2 comes out and has 16 cores, right? Oh, all of a sudden Cinebench isn't important. And then Intel just crams a bunch of little cores. All of a sudden Cinebench is important again. I'm sure they'll change their mind when Zen 6 comes out with 24 cores. I don't know. I think it's silly. Personally, that's not the first things I'm looking at in a CPU review. Naughty DJ Aftershock writes, and it says, will they retire the Navi name for UDNA? I'm hearing that the code name for UDNA X Arc is another bright star name in another constellation. I don't know. I mean, I would think so, right? It's common sense that they would probably call UDNA its own thing. I would think so. Um, I have nothing else to say besides that, though. UDNA is not coming out for years, so I'm kind of a little more focused on the dozens of launches I'm going to need to be covering over the next 2 months. If I we'll see if I get any sleep. Um, all right, so I got through those tipped questions. Let me get back to the Intel stuff because wow, do we have pages of questions about Pat Gelsinger from the patrons today? Put a timestamp here. Okay, Battlemage questions and Pat. All right, keep the tipped questions coming though. I'll jump right back to them when I get a chance or when it's on subject. Impress AI Blocks writes in Tommy Guns. Battlemage genuinely sounds good if you ignore it being 18 months late, having awful drivers and not booting games, and being on a newer node than Navi 33. I added a sarcastic /S in case it wasn't obvious I wasn't serious. Yeah, I mean, again, this thing was really supposed to come out a year ago. Um, I I think I've said enough about Battlemage in terms of it not being that great. I don't want to beat a dead horse. Alex Smith writes in, "Hi Tom, on a scale from paper launch to real launch, how much do you think Battlemage was rushed out so that they could say that the desktop die launched in 2024? If they didn't have that deadline looming over them, do you think we would have seen a higher end Battlemage die instead? Or is this just a nail in the coffin for AXG? Well, isn't AXG already gone? But actually, I my answer to you, Alex Smith, if they didn't have Battlemage on the roadmap, would they have launched it in 2025? Maybe they just wouldn't have launched it at all. I leaked, effectively canceled. What does that mean? 2 years ago, and I said effectively canceled. They're done. They just know they can't say they're done, or there will be endless lawsuits. So what are they going to do? Pretend that they're still dancing when they're really not dancing anymore. I mean, that's all that this is. My contrarian answer to you to Alex Smith is if Battlemage wasn't supposed to launch in 2024, if it wasn't on the roadmap, would they have launched it later? I think they wouldn't have launched it at all. This is only launching because they have to. They would have only used it in Lunar Lake. That's what I think. Truly. Jensen Wang writes in, would you bet $1 billion that Pat was fired because he refused to license our IP we generously offered years ago? Usually the Jensen Wang person, of course, has a joke question. But joking aside, when I choose to read one of his questions, you know, as critical as I am on Intel graphics, I don't actually think Intel should have bought all of Nvidia's IP. Like if you look it up, that Nvidia is trying to get them to buy all of their IP. I don't think that they should continue to license it. I don't think they should have gone for Nvidia tiles right away. I think now Intel should go with Nvidia tiles next year or something. If Nvidia will even sell them to them anymore, I don't know if they will because Nvidia is making their own CPUs. So maybe that they missed the boat on that one. But the only reason I think they should go with Nvidia tiles in their APUs in the future is because of how weak they are, because they have no other choice, because if we're being honest, it'd probably work really well to just have Nvidia make a tile for Nova Lake or something. So that's why I think they should do it. But it's because they're in a position of weakness. Intel wasn't in a position of weakness a decade ago. They were in a position of strength. And what they should have done is if they could have started it sooner, really start rolling with the GPU launches by 2016 and not gone for the high end. All this money spent trying to compete all the way up to the 3080 down with Alchemist was a waste. Should have had one die and just executed on it quicker, innovated quicker, evolved the architectures quicker with one die every gen. Or they just, shouldn't have bothered. But what they decided to do is try to bite the whole thing at the wrong time. And so, yeah, I mean, should have Intel bought only NVIDIA IP for their graphics in the past? No, I think it was a good idea to innovate their GPU architectures. I just think they tried to do too much too late. And now I think they probably should buy NVIDIA tiles for their APUs, for being honest. Clean Sweep writes in and says, Dr. Ian Cutcher said on a recent stream about Pat's firing that part of Intel's problem is that it hasn't decided if it's a fab company with products or a product company with fabs. Do you think this is the right way to frame Intel's problem? If it's not, then what is? Well, so I don't know. I saw Ian Cutcher's pretending Royal Core never existed on Twitter, which it absolutely does. So I'm just going to sidestep whatever that opinion is because there's been some surprises that Pat was fired too. No one should be surprised that Pat was fired. Everyone I talked to, many industry veterans behind the scenes, if you actually were talking to industry veterans or had any connections, a lot of people knew Pat was going to be fired soon. So I'm going to sidestep whatever that opinion is there because I don't know where half of this is coming from anymore. And I'm just going to say that, let's see, the exact question is Intel's problem that it hasn't decided it's a fab company with products or a product company with fabs? No, I think it's obvious that Intel has been its whole life a product company with fabs. This isn't up for debate. It's not like they're trying to decide, are we a fab company or are we not? Look at any commercials from 10, 20 years ago. Intel was a product company, Intel Core inside, that happened to still own fabs, just like AMD was before they spinned off their fabs. Intel is a product company with fabs. They only were forced to start pretending they're a fab company because their products failed. And I think there's a lot of people that, like, when they look at Intel's situation right now, they're missing how little choice they actually have. Intel isn't trying to wrestle with if they want to be a fab company. They have to become one because their products don't work anymore and it's their only choice. They don't have a choice. Their only option is to go with what they can do. And they know that at least fabs might work out. But that was born out of necessity, not out of trying to become a new company. And now that's failed. Their fabs are failing. You know, what was it? This report came out today or yesterday. It's like 10% yields on 18A. Their products are failing. They can't launch anything on time. And so the way I would frame Intel in the past 2 years and what Intel really is that it's no longer a matter of choices that they can make at their leisure. It's time for survival mode. They need a gut management. They need to probably sell off 10 to 33% of their fabs if they can get anyone to do that because they're empty right now and they can't get any customers to buy their fabs. And they need to can vanity projects that aren't making them money, like Arc. Like, and these aren't choices. It's like when someone says, well, what is Intel now? What should they choose to do? The time of choice is over. 10 years ago, Intel had choices. What did they want to do? What did they want to make? And they made the wrong ones. And now they're out of money and it's all survival mode. It's not what do we want to be? It's what can we survive as? And that needs to be the I'm sure that is. Pat's gone. I'm sure that's the conversation. I'm sure because I think Pat came in and said, we want to be an AI company, too late. We want to be a GPU company, too late. We want to do this and Optane and all of that. Dead, dead, dead. It's all dead. That was the wrong approach. You know, hiring too many people, going into markets you can't afford to compete in. What should have happened to a degree and what is now going to happen out of necessity is Intel isn't going to decide what company they want to be. They're going to figure out what company they can survive as. Not a choice. The hatchet men are about to take over and go, can't afford, can't afford, can't afford, can't afford. And so, yeah, again, I think they need a gut half of management. I think they're going to need to become a company half as big as they are now, sell off fabs, and they need to make good cores. They need to make good cores. That's what they need to be. And I think they're going to hemorrhage a lot of server market share, honestly. And their saving grace has to be consumer. They have to get back to competing in laptop and desktop because they're going to keep that is the one place where they can swing back market share quickly, I think, because consumers will just buy what's best for them. Server contracts last for many years. And then once you swing back consumers, you can go for server again. That's what Intel's going to be. Again, it's survival mode right now. That's what they are. They're not choosing who they want to be. The decision's been made for them. They're trying to figure out what they can even survive as over the next few years. So yeah, let me write that down. Right, well, just write down some notes too. They'll probably be a short. Okay. Let's see. Let me get through a few more of these Intel questions, then I'll get to the tipped ones. Everybody, let me just make sure I'm not missing any. Yeah. Whoa. Put that up here. Oh, please hit the like button, everybody. We're almost to like 1,400 live watchers. Can we get to 1,000 likes? Come on, hit the like button, please. It helps. Hit the like button, people. All right. Russell Purcell writes, and it says, any nuggets you gleaned from Tap's appearance on the Nerdcast? The perpetual liar that lied to gamers about Alchemist State? No, I have nothing to fucking say about Tom Peterson and the line factory that he's the manager of at ARC. AI Soldier 789 writes in and says, hey, Tom, will a penny pincher CEO be able to reduce costs for Intel that much that they can become profitable again? Their fabs are just money-burning machines, and their products don't have much synergy, or is the objective for the new CEO to sell Intel for a good price? Actually, my answer to this question is, can we stop saying derogatory terms for people good at business, like penny pinchers and bean counters? It's good AMD has bean counters. I know sometimes we get mad they canceled big RDNA 4, and, that maybe the core counts aren't where we were hoping they'd be at a certain time, despite the large IPC increases every generation. But because AMD has bean counters, they're not going out of business. And I can't help but think Intel could have really used some penny pinchers or bean counters, right? And not just hired too many people and then fired them all. I mean, I'm hearing about people's benefits getting cut who left Intel, by the way. It's bad. They're like screwing over their employees because they weren't penny pinchers. Enough acting like it's bad to be a bean counter. Worst case scenario, they're necessary evil. But if I'm being honest, bean counters are the people that make sure the lights stay on. Like, I don't know why we have to act like this. And I think Intel's, um, I don't know why, when I look at the state Intel's in, I just don't know how we can still keep saying terms like bean counters. I mean, come on. Let's see here. Bang for a Buck writes in and says, I don't think there was anything inherently wrong with Pat. He is a guy that you'd think would do very well, but I think he made a mistake in strategy, spending endless amounts of money despite closing down businesses like Optane and building out fab capacity. While showing the fabs are the major reason why Intel is losing money was just a boneheaded move. I would wager that Intel has enough capacity in the nodes that they offer already, except their newest meme node, I guess, 18A, and throwing more money at capacity when you can't fill what you have is just throwing good money out after bad. Yeah, but it's not just it's everything. Like, you're talking about spending endless amounts on this. It's not just the fabs, or it's everything. Pat expanded the fabs too much, hired too many people, invested in project and vanity projects like Arc. It's I think Pat would have been I don't know for sure. Maybe he wouldn't have been. I know people who now just hate the guy, but I think Pat would have been a good CEO 15 years ago when they had all the money. That's when you bring in the engineer who goes, we're not getting complacent. We're innovating. We're going to make GPUs now because we have the money. We're going to have more capacity. Think if that would have happened. Think if Pat was CEO 6 years before when he actually took over or something, even just 6 years. Maybe they would have had more capacity during the pandemic, during 2021 when they had capacity issues. Maybe they would have had GPUs ready for mining booms. But just because, this is the feeling I get with Pat, just because you come, just because you were right, like Pat was right, they should have had GPUs sooner, they should have had more capacity sooner, doesn't mean you're right perpetually, right? Like, an example I'll give, because I listen to a decent amount of financial stuff, is there are these just doom and gloom people that since, I don't know, forever, like since 2000 or 2010 probably, have said all you should do is buy gold and the stock market's going to hit a depression. Maybe that'll happen in a year, 5 years, 10 years. I don't know. They certainly don't know because they've been wrong for 15. But there are these doom and gloom people that are analysts that are like, only buy gold, the market's going to crash. And if you've been saying that since 2010, sorry, boss, it's been 15 years and you've been wrong for 15 years. If you're right next year, that means you were right 1 out of 16 times. And I think that happened with Pat. He came in and said, we shouldn't have canceled GPU. We should have expanded foundries. We should have been more aggressive with our core teams. We shouldn't have bought McAfee for $7 billion. Pat, we agree with you. You're right. You're right. You're right. But you were right then. That doesn't mean you can take the last war's playbook into a current war. And I just feel like that's what happened with Pat. I feel like half of the decisions he made would have been good ones a decade earlier, but that doesn't make you right if you do them a decade late. You have to innovate and go, this is a different company now. Maybe pick one vanity project. Maybe you expand their integrated graphics to be dedicated, but you're just like, we're going to make a 192-bit card every 2 years. One card, not two. And we're just going to try to keep the drivers moving. Maybe he could have gotten away with that, but instead he went for the whole enchilada when lunchtime was over. I don't know if that makes sense. Cole Addict writes in and says, hi, Tom. Do you agree that it was losing the TSMC discount because of Pat's big mouth that was the last straw that made the board push him out? No, I think that, that certainly would have helped. I shouldn't say no. Yes, that's part of it. I think it was everything right now. Arrow Lake failed, and their foundry business isn't working out, and then Battlemage failed. And I think it's Battlemage is the last straw, people. I think the final briefings came out and they were like, we're competing with an 8 nanometer 3060. You're fired because Pat hyped up. What did he hype up the most? Pat was the contrarian in the room saying we need to keep graphics cards. So that's on him. And we need to expand fabs and hiring. Also on him then. So I think we're here where I think I think the yields for 18A came in as shit. And then Battlemage came in as shit. And they said, Pat, those are both on you. You're out. I think that's what it was. I think it really was. Because Battlemage, look up quotes. He was the one pushing Arc the hardest. Like that was him. I mean, I know it started before that or whatever, but like he was the one that, oh, I'm sure this is the right move. I think it's Battlemage coming in as not delivering and them going, we can't afford this anymore. Also, let me say, I don't know why, I don't think it should be as shocking when CEOs are removed from companies. Like they're paid so much money. I think CEOs should be pushed aside more often. If they're going to make, 300, 400 times what the average worker does, why wouldn't? I mean, they've been making 4 times the revenue, like 4 times the income a normal, even executive or something half the time would be, if not way more than that, depending on the CEO we're talking about. You should be switching CEOs when, someone's good for a job, you pay them a ton to work nonstop. And then when they stop, it shouldn't be shocking to remove a CEO. I don't think it should be shocking. Sheriff Lotfi writes, and it says, hey, Tom, hey, Moore's Law said, this is a second question. With how Windows is completely inconsistent with AMD, do you continue to see this kind of potential treatment should Intel be bought by like Samsung or Qualcomm? If so, do you think AMD might try to go to other software companies or create its own? I don't think they're going to make their own competitor to Windows. I'll just answer that question there. But I will say I actually suspect that a lot of the issues with like AMD and Windows right now, it isn't because Microsoft's nerfing AMD. I just think it's the legacy of Wintel. Microsoft and Intel were buddy for so many decades that I just think they don't try to sometimes, and they still kind of whatever they're doing benefits Intel more. The relationships are there. They know each other. Like the way they've been doing things closely is still established. So I don't think the Zen 5 stuff isn't Microsoft's fault to a degree. Yes, I still think AMD deserves a lot of blame with the Zen 5 launch. But I don't think Microsoft was like, we're going to screw AMD, and they cooked up a plan with Intel. I think it just kind of happened. And maybe they didn't take AMD's complaints seriously, or they missed them, or I don't know. But I think it's just like the legacy of Wintel. It's not Microsoft trying to screw over AMD, at least not in this circumstance. The only time they seem to try to is where they say they're going to buy their APUs and then don't, which they seem to like to do all the time. All right, let me move on. Now we can get to some more of these tip questions again. Keep them coming. Let me put a new timestamp here for RDNA 4 and stuff. Austin Schaefer writes and it says, should I wait for the RTX 5000 and RDNA 4 or get a 7900 XT now for 600? I feel like this deal won't be around for too much longer. It won't be because they're going to be out of stock. Because they're not making RDNA 3 anymore, the top ones. I don't think they are. So this was an easy answer for me a few months ago, even 2 months ago. Could you get a 7900 XT for $600? Okay, well then whatever. Let's say it's October or September, 20 gigabyte card. What's AMD going to do? Have something come out 20% better for probably the same price but less RAM in a few months? And who knows? Tariffs, shortages. Who knows if it'll be easy to get RDNA 4 when it first comes out? I think they'll have a lot of volume, but you don't know until you know. It was easy in October or September for me to say, get the 7900 XT for $600, man. Don't wait. Game all Christmas. Well, but now it's been a couple months. We're getting to the point where I'm like, you can't wait 1 month. I think I can still easily recommend again 3060 for like $250. Sure, 12 gigabyte card for that little. 6750 XT. I showed that earlier. A 6750 XT 12 gigabyte for $300. 6800 16 gigabyte for $350. Easy recommendations. I think I've seen 7800 XTs refurbished for $400. Yeah, I mean, look, RDNA 4 will be stronger than the 8800 XT will be stronger than a 7800 XT. But will it be 50% stronger? Even if it was, it's going to cost 50% more. It's easy for me to recommend a lot of the sub $500 cards right now. I can't really recommend the 4080, the 4070 Ti, any of these other expensive cards once you get above $700 because I'm sorry, wait 1 month, you're gonna get a better card from AMD. It's RDNA 4, it looks amazing. Um, and when it comes to the 7800 XT, unfortunately, I just got to look at the exact pricing right now. Let's see here. RX 7900 XT 20 gigabyte. Yeah, so it's like 650. I don't know. Look, if you are going to have 2 weeks off and you're going to game and you want a game, you have some games you want to play, sure, $600 for a 7900 XT. I can still, coach, I can still bless your decision to do that. But I would just keep in mind that there's a chance in a month a stronger card might launch for 550 or something. And then, you'll have to decide, are you going to sell your 7900 XT for 450, spend $100 to upgrade or side grade? It's not the worst thing. I mean, I remember I had a 390X. This is way back in the day, people, like 2014, 2015. And I knew the RX 480 was coming out and was going to trade blows with the 390X. So I sold my 390X a week before it launched because I knew when it was going to launch for $300, got a 480 for 230, 250. I think it was 240, and it was same performance while using 100 watts less. And I won. What a great deal. So maybe you just be prepared for that. If you pay $600 for a 7900 XT now, I'm sure I'll have pre-launch leaks that are like, ooh, it launches in a week, it's going to be this good. Yeah, all right. Well, just be ready to put it on Craigslist maybe for 500 and then buy that for 550 the next week if the money is that important for you. Yeah, that's really the best advice I could give there. And again, anything above that, wait. Don't buy a 480. Don't spend $1,000 on a graphics card. Wait 1 month to get the same performance for half the price, or at least significantly better. Let's see. We still got graphics questions here, so let's continue those. With seeing this is from Confused Council, with seeing the Indiana Jones system requirements and the integration of upscaling and ray tracing into more games and consoles, do 8 GB or 12 GB cards still have value? Yes, even 8. Yeah, sure. They still have value. Um, it's just not as much as before. Like if Nvidia launches the 5060 with 8 GB for $300, no, and the 7600 XT is almost $300 right now with 16 gigabytes. I'm sorry. At this point, 8 GB is I have what do I have here? I mean, Dan's laptop has a 3056 gigabyte. It can run Deep Rock Galactic. It can actually run every game we have. He just has to turn on DLSS. He has to be in 1080p or lower. But actually, it can usually game in 1080p at 120 hertz or something on his. I think he's a 90 hertz display, so it's fine. It's just that's what it is. 8 GB cards are for 1080p low now. They are like that's what they're for. And if you're still buying games and there's not an issue, then good for you. It's just 8 GB cards have value. They just should be $200 or less, I think. And I think 12 GB cards should probably be 350 or less, maybe 300 or less. And so on and so forth. And there shouldn't be any 16 GB cards for certainly not over $1,000. But if we're being honest, I don't think over 700. I mean, I got a Radeon 7 in early 2019 for $700, people. That was 16 gigabytes for $700 in 2019. Just 5 years ago, over 5 years ago. It was early 2019. So I think the time, all these cards still have value. 4 GB cards do $100. Dan has an RX 6400 that he keeps as a backup in case his graphics card were to break. It could power both of his displays. Technically, he could play Age of Empires in all of his games, just have to turn down all settings. But that's what that's for. 4 GB is like bargain bin, $50 stuff. 8 GB is ultra budget. 12 GB is low end now. It is. Mexi Man and Cheese says, sorry for not being clear. What I meant about the Z2 Extreme is any updates on potential release windows. Oh, no, but I mean, wasn't there just a story about that on video cards today? Let me see here. Because I think they announced, someone did, right? Yeah, the GPD Win 4, the smallest handheld. It doesn't come with a Z2 Extreme, but it has an HX370. When does this release? Let's see. I'm increasing it. The system. Let's see. Do we have release date? I don't know. Doesn't say when it's coming out, but I think we can say that there's almost certainly going to be Z2 Extreme products Q1 next year. Yeah, I mean, I think that's, and if not first half, and it doesn't matter that much because we already have Strix appearing in handhelds by then too, anyways. Okay, and now even a lot of GPU questions all of a sudden. All right, Confused Council writes in again, and let me put down a time stamp here and asks, is Nvidia on the path to become the next Intel? Sticking with a dead-end architecture, Blackwell seems like nothing more than Lovelace with more power and faster RAM and no real innovation. I, I mean, to be fair, to Blackwell, everybody, I believe it uses. Actually, just talked to someone at Nvidia about this. I don't. This is probably public. I think it's already leaked from someone else, but I can confirm that like Nvidia's 4N node was a custom version of 4 and 5 nanometer libraries. It sounds like, and 4NP is not N4P. Like there's TSMC N4P node. What they're going to use for Blackwell is 4NP, which is their custom N4P thing. But that's, like what, a 10% better node at most than what they have. So if you say all Blackwell is going to do is raise performance by like 40 to 60% at the top end, mid-range, probably 20, 30%, 15, 30% in the mid-range, while using a bit more power. I mean, yeah, but they're not really using a new node. So, I mean, this is what you get. I mean, look at what happens when you're stuck on a node. You have the HD 7970 that goes to the 290X. AMD managed to increase performance by over 50% on the same node. Yes, it required a bigger die size and going from like, 225 watts to 300 watts or whatever it was. Yeah, so that's what NVIDIA is going to do. They're going, what was that, like a 300 something millimeter squared die size to I think 400 something. So, yeah, I mean, look, that NVIDIA is going to do the same thing. They're going to increase their die size by, it sounds like 20 to 30%, use better RAM, up power a bit. And that's how we're using practically the same node. They're going to give you another generational uplift. I don't know. I wouldn't say that's not innovating. That's a far cry from Intel giving you 5% performance uplifts year over year. This is 50% on the same node. It's not nothing, my dude. Adralves writes, it says, I don't like Pat's character, honestly. I'm sure this meltdown humbled him a bit. I know ARC might not make financial sense, but I still hope they succeed at least in the low to mid-range market. I think all too often people get pigeonholed into thinking this one way is the only one true way things can turn out. And ARC is a perfect example of that. And by that, I mean, everyone keeps saying they hope they keep making it so we have more GPU competition. Why don't we just cut out the middleman? Just say, I want more GPU competition. Maybe from ARM, or from AMD going at it with NVIDIA harder. I think AMD being more aggressive against NVIDIA will do more for pricing of GPUs than anything Intel is going to do as a third player. Stop saying the only way this will happen is if this one thing the Doth Tech Tuber said 2 years ago to me. We want more GPU competition by getting more GPU competition. That can come from ARM. That can come from NVIDIA actually making their own APUs, which was pressure on AMD. Apple becoming more competitive with a graphics card. There's ways. PlayStation graphics cards was a joke, I think, short we put out before. Like, we can get more competition in GPU without it coming from the one true person. And so that's all I would say is I hope there's more competition, because so far Intel hasn't provided that. And if they do, good, but I want anyone to. It doesn't need to necessarily be Intel. What else do we got here? So that's the last of that one. All right, so let me continue down the GPU questions here before rounding back to CPU. Again, keep the tip questions coming in. All right. Yeah, so let me put let's see, RDNA 4 performance. Change this here. All right. Kiln God writes in, says, Tom, is the 8800 XT more or less a 4070 Ti? Looking at UDN, it should double the ray tracing over the 8800 XT, or I'm assuming you mean to say 7800 XT. But will this matter with Mega Lights or other new technology? The 8800 XT, I mean, I can tell you what it is. Navi 48 or whatever was going to be what Navi 48's occupying. My understanding is that there was Navi 4C, and that's that giant chiplet RDNA 4. There was like going to be that, and then probably kind of like the 7800 XTX, and then there'd be the 7800 XT that would use less chiplets. So they're going to have some giant like $2,500 graphics card with RDNA 4. Below that would probably be a $1,000 chiplet graphics card, and then they would also cut that down to like $700 or 800, whatever. And then below that, they were going to have probably like a $400 192-bit card, and that would be 48, and then 44. My understanding was going to be some 128-bit card at the low end, and then they canceled big RDNA 4 for two reasons. Number one, the monolithic RDNA 4s turned out fantastic, from what I hear, from what I have been hearing, um, and then also they decided it wasn't worth the money to push this $2,500 chiplet graphics card for a multitude of reasons. I'm not going to regurgitate all of them. So if you cancel the big one, but your monolithic one's turning out well, let's beef it up. And that's how I think you get this 256-bit 16 GB 8800 XT. So it kind of started as what the 4070 Ti was, or maybe a little weaker than that. But what it's ending up as is more of a fully fleshed out mid-range graphics card with a 256-bit bus, 16 gigabytes of RAM, and pushing high-end performance from the previous gen into the mid-range pricing. I think it's gonna firmly beat the 4070 Ti, which means it should beat the 5070, I think. And this Loggins writes, and it says, if the 5080 and 5090 become known as professional or non-gaming cards, this is a leak I put out where I've documents from retailers where Nvidia is telling people if they complain about 5080 prices at like Micro Center or Best Buy, they tell them it's not for gaming. But anyways, he goes, should GPU reviewers then avoid these cards, similar to how they rarely review professional cards like Quadros? No, this I don't think reviewers should play it like that. I think what Nvidia reviewers should do is review a product for what it is. And if the 5080 and 5090 come out and they're fantastic for professional workloads, which they probably will be, reviewers like Hardware Unboxing Gamers Next should say, yes, this is excellent for that. But then, much like a Threadripper review, although that's more professionally, but follow me here, not worth it for gaming. And that's all they should do. They should slam the prices for bad price performance if they are for gaming, but praise them. Don't be emotional about it. Praise them if they're good for professional workloads. But no, I don't think we should just ignore them and pretend Nvidia doesn't have high-end cards anymore. They're only professional. That's not what I would think. Mark Smith writes, and Tom, in your best guess, what is your prediction of what might happen to the GPU market if the next generation of cards are more expensive than the current generation? Will the estimated performance leaks be enough to sway people to upgrade? Well, I feel like I get a question like this every generation of graphics cards, and I have to caveat that how it exactly turns out is going to make a huge difference to what I think about it, right? Like, I think this happened before with like Lovelace leaks, where I was like, what did I say? I think it was something like it was like 75 to 100% more performance, or like probably not quite getting to 100% more performance than a 3090, especially when you turn on ray tracing. And then the pricing would be between here and here. The 4090 was going to be, I think, between like 1,500 and 2,000. It ended up 1,600. Oh, so cheaper than the top. And then the performance was pretty close to the top end of what I was told it could pull off. So if the performance is near the top, the pricing in the middle, 4090, I think was an okay card, although expensive, but it delivered what it should have. And was certainly better price performance than the outgoing 3090 Ti. The same thing with the 5090. Like, I don't know the last time I quoted what I've been told about, 5090 performance, but I think I'll make it a wider range just to be safe. Like 40 to 70% more performance than the 4090 is what I expect. And, I've already leaked that the pricing should be, I believe it was like 2,000 to 2,500. All right. Well, so there's a lot of wiggle room in there. If the 5090 is only 40% faster than the 4090 and costs 2,500, no, I don't think a lot of people will be that impressed. If it's 60% faster than the 4090 for 2,000, well, they'll say, well, there's another 60% performance for 20% more money. That's a 30% increase in price performance. It's a bargain again, even though it's expensive. So until we know the exact pricing and performance, exactly how cut down the 5090 will be when they reveal it, I can't tell you if people will buy it. Like, again, the 5070. I've been told that in behind the scenes, they are comparing the RTX 5070 to the 4070 Ti. No, not the Super, the 4070 Ti, which would tell me that it's probably like a 12 gigabyte 4070 Super at best in performance, is what I'm hearing. Okay. 4070 Ti Super 12 gigabyte performance. Okay, well, if that's what it is, what if it actually beats the 4070 Ti Super by 5% and is $500? I still think 12 gigabytes, because that's what it should have, isn't enough for a $500 card, but I can at least go, I don't know, it's the 3070 all over again. Price performance is pretty good. It's going to run out of RAM for the resolutions you're going to want to use it for soon. But what if it's $700 and loses to a 4070 Ti? It's like, what if it's 3% faster than a 4070 Super for $700? Then I say it's bad. That's the thing. There's a range. It's between this and this 20% pricing range, 20% performance range. If it's at the peaks of both, it could be really good. If it's at the bottom of both, it could be really bad. So I think a lot of people would buy a 5070 12 gigabyte for $500 if it delivered almost 4080 performance. I'd still say RDNA 4 would be a better option, but it's somewhat competitive. However, if AMD launches a $600 4080 and Nvidia has a $700 4070 Ti, yeah, I don't think that's going to do that well, but could be wrong. But until we know exactly how it's segmented and priced, you can't say for sure. John Wick Boomstick writes and it says, what is the likelihood of this scenario? Nvidia dominating high end, the 5070 Ti and up there being in that high end due to high prices, and then AMD dominating the mid range, presumably if the league performance is true, and then Intel taking over low end gaming if they don't mess up drivers. No, Intel's not going to take over anything in GPU. I'm sorry, I don't think they will. They've canceled the laptop launch. What that tells everyone, all their AIBs and their OEMs, is that they aren't confident. If they're confident, they launched a laptop. They're not. And right now in Intel, it has the B580, a card that competes with the 3060, maybe 3060 Ti with 5 nanometer technology versus 8 nanometer technology back in the day. That's not impressive at all. What do you think is going to happen when AMD launches an 8600 XT for like 300? I think it's going to crush it. So no, I don't see them taking the entire low end market at all. And again, as I've already, let's see, is that still opened over there? And as I've already talked to you guys about, right now to this day, there are still cards that you can get like the 6800 that technically have the same level of price performance as the B580. Go to an earlier part of the video after the stream is over to see that analysis, everybody. But right now, if the only thing the B580 can claim is price performance, it doesn't even beat things like a $230 3060 12 gigabyte, $350 6800 anyway. So it's really not even winning that. Which is, it should win it hard because that's all it would have. Okay, let's get back to some of these tipped questions here. So Zahir Khan writes in and says, I have all the components for my next PC build, but I'm just waiting for the 5090 and 9950 X3D. Are there any rumblings around inventory to satisfy the initial demand? Let me write down a timestamp for this because a lot of people are probably curious. Blackwell and X3D supply. My suspicion, and it's not just a suspicion, I've talked to people about it, but I wouldn't, if I was 100% sure, I would have already put out a leak video. So this is like a half done leak you're getting right here, Zahir. It's looking like Blackwell will have decent supply of the 5090 and 5080 for like a week and sell quickly, and then that might be it. But it's hard to say because a lot of it depends still on how well the AI boom is still going early next year. Because remember, just thinking critically and logically, the RTX 5090 could have launched 6 months ago, is my understanding. Well, then maybe 4 months ago. And then they pulled back the launch for the 5080, and they pulled back the launches again because they want to get rid of their last generation. And they're like, well, if AMD is not launching RDNA 4 and Battlemage is effectively canceled, then why launch now? Like, why do what we did in 2022 where we had all of this oversupply of Ampere competing with Lovelace? I think AMD and Nvidia are deciding, let's let that sell during the holiday season, and then we'll launch in quarter 1. So, because they could have launched 4 months ago, I think should they want to, they could have a lot of stock. But I think it's going to be, I think you're going to see them shove a bunch into the market to try to get in before tariffs. And then they're going to focus on AI and other stuff. So I don't know. I think you'll probably be able to get a 5090. But I'm not married to that too because I don't know where they'll price it, how much demand there will be there, and what's going to happen with trade wars next year. So it's just a lot more influencing what my prediction would be versus the last generation. 9950 X3D. I bet AMD ships a bunch of those. You'll probably be able to get that. 5090, we'll see. I guess that's my answer. Um, our AJ Ravels writes in and says, "Why has Radeon's market share fell so much lately? I remember them having like 30% in 2019. Like I have a 7800 XT, and at least here in Brazil, it's very good bang for the buck." Um, well, look, I think there's a few things going on when it comes to looking at GPU market share. First of all, a lot of the numbers are horseshit, guys. I mean, I'm sorry, like you can see it. Nvidia counts any gaming card sold as gaming revenue. We know half of those cards are going to AI and miners, right? Like we know it. I've talked to people at Micro Center that are like, they'll see 4090 still selling every now and then for $2,000, above MSRP to this day. And half of the people they ask say they're getting it for AI. So I don't know what percentage of Nvidia's gaming revenue is really going to AI, but it's a lot of it. So that's number one. Number two, I mean, look, I think the 4060 got bad reviews, but now it's selling okay from what I'm told. Selling all right, guys. The 3050 was a joke at 450. I'd still say the 3050 is not a good deal now. There's a narrow window, I think, where the 3050 was like 250 and the 6600 was 300, where it was like kind of an okay deal, but we're past that. But people see 8 GB RTX and it's like 230, 200 sometimes now, sometimes 180, I think I've seen, and they're buying them. Same with the 3060. Nvidia kept trying to milk the 3060 above 350. Now it's 250. People are buying 3060s in bulk because it has 12 gigabytes and it has an Nvidia sticker on it. So I think that's where a lot of this is coming from. And the 4070s always sold. Actually, it sold very badly at first, but eventually this 4070 super sales picked up and they continue to be okay. So, it's a combination of a lot of these cards really aren't being sold to gamers. We can see it in the numbers. You can parse it out, but it's also just, you get a 12 gigabyte Nvidia card below 300 and it sells because people just maybe low information buyers just see that and they buy it. So, it is what it is. Well, I don't really think a $250 3060 is a horrible deal, to be clear. And if I think an Nvidia card isn't a horrible deal, the market, who know where Nvidia has much more mind share, is probably just meaning it's going to sell really, really well. All right, let's see here. All right, so that's all those tipped questions still. I'm gonna pivot over here to, I have at least one PS5 Pro question, so let's get that out of the way. PS5 Pro. Again, hit the like button. Over 1,300 people watching. Let's get to over 1,000 likes. Oh, and make sure you're subscribed, by the way. Like, that really does help the channel get recommended. When we grow with subscribers more, it becomes a runaway effect where it's recommended more, which is more subscribers. Everyone watching, please double check that you're subscribed to the Moore's Law City YouTube channel. Early 80s PC Gamer writes in, do you think the PlayStation 5 Pro was overpriced or priced to prevent scalpers so there wasn't a run on them? Did Sony decide to pocket the money that scalpers were getting? Actually, I think the scalpers were going to get a lot more money. Not really. I think Sony priced the PS5 Pro exactly where scalpers got screwed over, first of all. But second of all, when it comes to the PS5 Pro pricing, again, I remember that video I did analyzing the PS5 Pro. And at first I was like, I couldn't believe that they were actually going to go not for $599, not for $649, but for $699. Yeah, that surprised me. But at the end of the day, in my analysis video, which you can find on the Moore's Law City YouTube channel, what I concluded once I took a step back and looked around, because I don't know, I mostly pay attention to PC hardware. I don't know what Xbox is priced at every given time. I thought it would have been less. But when I looked, I was like, I just think Sony was pricing the PS5 Pro relative to Xbox. Like right now, the PS5 Slim is $379, I believe. They just did a price drop. And I think that's where it should be, $379. But make no mistake, the PS5 Slim would be $329, $319 maybe, or most $350. If a 4 teraflop Xbox Series S wasn't still stupidly priced at $349. I think Sony would be willing to drop prices a little more than they are. But when Sony looks on Amazon and sees an Xbox Series S for $350 with 4 teraflops, not even an ability to add a disk drive, proprietary Vita memory cards that cost more than just adding your own SSD, I think Sony goes, of course we're charging 10% more. We would do 329, but if the Xbox Series S is 350, we'd be idiots to not add 10% on that and make it 380. So I think that's what happened. I think the same thing happened with they saw the Xbox Series X 2 terabyte drop for freaking $600. I think it should be 400 by now, by the way. And they went with the disk drive, we're going to charge 30% more. I mean, it's wildly stronger. We also have more games that people want to play. They're having trouble selling their $600 2 terabyte console. Of course, we're going to charge 30% more. I think if the Xbox Series X 2 terabyte was 450, the 1 terabyte was 400, and the Series S was 250 right now, Sony would be at 330 and 549 or something. I think they would be. They could afford to be if they wanted to, without disk drive, of course. So you add that on top now at 630. It is what it is. I think all too often we're looking at the PS5 Pro in a vacuum and not going, they're just responding to worse pricing from Xbox. That's all they're doing. And if that's what the competitors are going to do, and and I'm sure they've also got people that have found like whatever Blackwell is probably going to launch for, and they're like, dude, the 5070 is going to be a little stronger than the PS5 Pro and be $600, $700 anyways. Why would we charge less for an entire console than a graphics card of similar performance? I just think their answer is they're not going to. So, and again, I saw some people in the live chat say $1,000 iPhone. Sure, maybe that too. They're pricing their products relative to the market, and I think they just decided to jump the shark on the pricing, like go way beyond the scary $600 price that doomed the PS3 for a while, and say we're not worried about that anymore because the competition's priced their stuff here. All right, let me get to a couple more patron questions. I've almost worked through 7 pages of questions, if you guys can believe it. Dude writes in, hi Tom, keep up the good work. I just want to talk through my upgrade thoughts. I have an AMD 3900X 12 core Zen 2, okay, a 6800 XT on my desktop with an OLED 3440 ultra wide 165 hertz display. I was considering buying a 5700X 3D, but I'm mostly satisfied with my 3900X in gaming. I don't want to spend money to lose in coding performance. I considered getting a 5800X, 5900X, but I don't know. I'd rather put money aside for my upgrade. Well, let me cut you off here quick and say I had a 3950X. Yeah, I had to get it. The first desktop, like consumer 16 core that wasn't like an HEDT. I thought it was crazy. So I had a 3950X, and then like I want to say 2 years ago, I think it was right before Zen 4 came out or after. But I sold the 3950X for like $300, $350, and bought a 5950X Zen 3 16 core for like $450. So it's like, it's like, will I spend $100 right now to not have to upgrade my system and get a 30% boost in performance? I said yes. You have a 3900X, so going to a 5700X 3D, if it's mostly used for gaming, I don't think is the dumbest thing. I will say I wish there was a 5950X 3D. What I think Gamers Nexus had that in a lab, didn't he? A dual Vcache CCD 5950X 3D that they decided not to launch. I would have spent $500 on that thing, 600 actually. I wish that existed. But as an aside, let me continue your question here. It says, I want to buy a 9800 X3D, but I don't live near a micro center. I feel like I'm not held back significantly by existing CPU. I'm hearing Zen 6 might have 12 or 16 core CCDs. So do you consider waiting for Zen 6 for someone not in a hurry to upgrade? Yes. This is the answer I'd give to almost every question. You're not in a hurry to upgrade. You're happy with your system. Don't make more e-waste. Why? Don't waste money. Wait for Zen 6, certainly. So number one, sure, if you're happy with your system, you can wait. Now he says, on the GPU front, I mostly play Warframe, and that runs at 165 hertz max settings very well with my system. But I do occasionally play single-player eye candy games like Ratchet and Clank, and I do notice hits to FPS now. I do turn down settings, but it doesn't give me the warm, fuzzy feeling every time I have to do so. I'm looking for at least a 50% increase in performance. I don't want to spend an arm and a leg on a GPU. So unless the 8800 XT, which I'm assuming is what its name is, matches the 7900 XTX and is $500 or less, I think I'm going to wait. Yeah, I don't know. I think because of the ray tracing and the power consumption reduction, you will notice the 8800 XT's performance big time. So I would consider upgrading to that. And you could sell your 6800 XT, I'm sure, used for 350, I would guess, next year. So are you willing to spend like $300 to, I don't know, double ray tracing performance, lower power consumption? I don't think it's the worst idea. But anyways, continuing his question for mobile gaming, I'm gonna probably skip that. How much more efficient would Medusa Point be, or more powerful would Medusa Halo have to be for you to consider skipping Strix Halo? Yeah, same question. Or same answer. Like, what should you wait for? AMD is gonna have new great products coming out in APU. This is some point I made a lot 6 months ago, and when like Hawk Point was out, I was testing. I have a Hawk Point system right over there. I actually let me unplug this and hold it up for you guys. Yeah, to make a point here. I actually have a Strix system right here. I'm testing it. It is pretty impressive. It's actually the snappiest system I've used in my life. I mean it. It's like I it is so snappy. Things boot in a second. Like I turn it on, it's on. Loading games, loading stuff is quicker than ever with this mini form Strix system. Um, you know, and in terms of performance, it beats Hawkpoint in gaming by pretty solid 30% in my testing. And it also it's almost up there with a 3050. It's certainly up there with a 3050 6 GB max Q from a laptop. And it just depends. Like, I think it just like the higher the resolution or something, like the newer architecture can kind of beat a 3050. But like for the most part, it's like in some games the Strix is 10% weaker than a desktop 3050, but then in other games it's half the performance or something. So it's not at desktop 3050 levels, but it's getting there. So you should go. So should you have waited to get that instead of Hawkpoint? Well, I don't know. Hawkpoint actually in my testing at 30 watts was 20% better than Phoenix, and Strix is like 30% better than Hawkpoint. And Medusa Point, I would suspect will be probably 30% better than Strix Point, because you're going from 8 plus 4 Zen 5 to 12 plus 0 Zen 6 with I leaked this in the Medusa Point leak. So all non-C cores probably, and it's Zen 6, so that's a 10% increase. Yeah. So yeah, probably 30% or more better CPU performance with Medusa Point. And it looks like it still probably just has 16 RDNA compute units, but it's probably RDNA 5 or something. So if you wait for that, you're going to be waiting then for the one that comes after that. I don't remember what the leak code name is for that one, but should you have waited for Strix instead of getting Hawkpoint? My initial thoughts at the beginning of the year were probably, but once I tested Hawkpoint and found that it is, 20% better than Phoenix, I went, no, you shouldn't. Hawkpoint was 10-20% better than Phoenix. Strix is about 30% better than Hawkpoint. Medusa Point be 30%. Don't wait for anything. Upgrade your laptop when it's ready to upgrade. That's what you do now, because AMD had Hawkpoint and Strix Point come out this year. Next year, they will have Strix Halo and then maybe Medusa Point or some refresh there. And then the next year, Medusa Halo probably, and other like it. And you're off Kraken. AMD is going to be launching at least a generation a year now. It's not going to be, they want the laptop market. So I think anytime you're waiting, unless it's like a month before it comes out, like if it's a month before Medusa Point comes out, maybe you wait, but it's not. Strix is Halo is a month away. I wouldn't skip that to wait for Medusa. I just think things are going to keep getting better. That's my opinion. So quite a long question from you, really about like 10 questions, but I thought I'd answer them. Falto writes in, should Microsoft just make Windows free? There's already a bunch of live services and ads baked into the operating system. Not to mention, technically, one can just never activate a copy, and they'll get literally all the functionality of a paid version other than to change the wallpaper. I think Microsoft should consider Windows Professional getting more support, not getting updates as often, truly only getting updates when it's like rigorously tested, and getting more freedom to mess with your apps and stuff and do things offline. And then they should just actually charge 150 for it and lock it down. But again, make it better than it is now. And then, look, I think Windows Home should probably be free at this point. I mean, with all the crap they bake into the operating system, it's no wonder, sponsor of the channel CDkeyoffer is so beloved by the more solid fans. It's like, why would we give more money to this company that's just kind of turning a operating system they want $100 for into a live service feed? I mean, yeah, I don't know. I think there's a real argument here that like over time, Windows Home has just become something that feels like a free operating system, a pay to win thing, if you will, and that professional should probably be beefed up. And if anything, home should be like $20. And if they did that, if they made Microsoft Home $20, because let's be honest, what home is them beta testing their updates for their professional and enterprise people. That's why it breaks everything. And then they go, oh, that's what breaks it. So let's not push this update to our enterprise customers until thank God we had all those beta testers that bought Microsoft Windows Home. They should just make it like $20 to kill the key sites probably, and then make professional better. That is what I think. I think it's kind of hilarious that they expect anyone to spend $100 on this operating system. That's clearly just beta test for their enterprise customers. I mean, that's what it is. And that's why we need SteamOS to succeed. So there's actually competition in operating systems. All right. So that is all the Patreon pre-made questions, but everyone else, put questions, the more thoughts, the Discord and the after video chat right now. I'll give it another 5 minutes to see if more questions appear in the live chat here. And then you can tell I'm starting to ramble and get tired. We'll have to call it an evening after that, I think. Let me see here if there's any good last minute questions here. Let's see. Nothing there. Do you think Nvidia could surprise people and keep the 5090 under 2000? I mean, yeah, there's a sliver of a chance, but they're going to charge more than the 4090. So, what does that put that at? 18, 1900, 2000? AIBs are going to charge over 2000. So I just find it very unlikely to be under 2 with no competition there. Although it's funny, it's like, where do they price the 5070 at if it's still 12 gigabytes? If they really do go with 12 gigabytes, because I'm sorry, that shouldn't be more than 500. It'd just be so weird if the lineup because the lineups with Nvidia, it used to be, let me try to think of like one that was like late, like let's go all the way back to Kepler, like the GTX 500 series, $500 80, and then $400 70, I think like $300 ish 60 Ti, $200, $250, $220, 60. The 50 was 150. Like everything was like 30 to 40% more expensive going up a tier. And then it really started to change once they launched the Titans. Maxwell was actually pretty balanced pricing wise, all things considered. Not that I'm saying it shouldn't have been cheaper for some of the tiers, but it kind of made sense. But then, then you get to RTX and it just all changes. You get the RTX 2060 for what was it, 350, the 70 for 450 to 500, then the 80, but then they dropped it. But the 80 started at 700, Titans for 1200. Then you're starting to get these like massive gulfs in pricing, and then good lord for the 2080 Ti at like over 1,000, Titan RTX at 2,500, over double the cost. And then we get into the situation we're in now, where look, it's conceivable the 5090 is going to be 2,000. And the 5080 is going to be like 1,300. I mean, and then you're going to go down to a 70 that's like less than half the price of what the 80 cost. I don't know. That's just not how things used to work when I was getting into PC gaming. Let me tell you guys that. And that's why I say, let's say the 5080 is $1,200. If they have something 50, 60%, 50% stronger than that, I don't know why it would be under $2,000. I just don't know why. Look at the pricing gulf between the 80 and 90s in the past. I just don't see it. Considering the RAM problem, would you suggest an 8800 XT or a 5070 Ti or 5080? The RAM, would you suggest an 8800 XT or? I mean, look, the 5070 Ti I think is probably going to be a cut down 203 card, so that means 16 gigabytes. The question will be, do you want to spend extra for like DLSS? And a lot extra probably. But I don't think the 70 Ti and the 80 are going to have the RAM problems that the 70 will have. Zahir Khan writes in, thank you for the tips, says, will 3D V cache be shared across the 9950X3D. Reading between the lines of the AMD tweet, they mentioned gaming. Well, AMD have a solid solution for dual CCDs. Still can't say 100%. All I can tell you is 100% AMD considers double V cache for the 9950X3D. Having said that, if they are 100% sure they have solved the core parking and CCD issues, I don't see why they need dual V cache. It would just cost them a little more, but make it more efficient and more consistent. But if they 100% fixed it, then and you don't need the Xbox Game Bar, then I guess you could argue they don't need it anyways. Got a text here. Okay, so that's off subject. I'm not seeing any questions from the Moore's Law is Dead Discord here. What's your expectation for 8600 XT performance and pricing? Well, I mean, it's all relative. If the 8800 XT is $600, I'm not sure. Let's say the 8800 XT is $600. Let's say it's a 4080. Again, let's just call it that to say it is what it is, I would suspect Navi 44 to be 60% the performance, 70 at most of that. So I can just tell you right now. Let's go to it. RTX 4080. Take power up. Let's even go to super. Let's be optimistic. Okay. So let's go to 60% of that performance. Yeah, I mean, I find it hard to believe it'd be that strong. But my suspicion is, would it really be that good though? Yeah, I mean, I would expect it to be around a 7700 XT. Maybe up to like, yeah, probably, yeah, probably around a 7700 XT, which means again it'll crush the Battlemage GPUs down there. And man, if they pull out a win, maybe 7800 XT. But if it has 32 compute units, which I believe it was supposed to, who knows if they changed that? If it has 32 compute units, though, even if you clock that 50% fast, it won't be clocked. Even with like a 20% IPC increase, yeah, I'm thinking 7700 XT about there probably. But plus minus 20%, and we need to see the final stuff. Rye Hill Cheeble says, I have a question, Tom. With the constant advancements of gaming-focused smartphones, do you see that as a threat to handheld PCs? Not really. I mean, handheld PCs are emerging because people want their Steam libraries on the go, and the ability to plug it in with like Oculink and use it as a desktop that they can put in their pocket when they're not plugged into a bunch of monitors. I don't see that as really competing with smartphones. No, not really. Not any more than they already have been. All right. Well, I think that will probably do it. All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for this live stream. I got through all the questions. I appreciate everybody for watching. Please hit the like button. Double check that you're subscribed to the Moore's Law is Dead YouTube channel. And also, this is important, Daniel Nenny, founder of SemiWiki.com, is set to be the next guest this weekend. What timing to talk to a veteran of Silicon Valley like this after Pat Gelsinger has exited Intel. So if you want to ask an expert on these companies' questions, join the Patreon right now. We're about to put out the request. And I mean, he's a fan favorite. So it's a good time to join the Patreon to ask that as well. And again, new die shrink just came out. Tons of bonus content coming out soon. And yeah, again, like it. Thanks for watching, everybody, and have a good weekend.